Welcome back to Convergence Knowledge Bytes with a Y, where we take complex business, technology, and security topics and break them down into bite-sized chunks for business leaders and owners to make informed decisions for their organization about various different things that they need to keep running and maximize their investments and opportunities for moving their companies forward. Today, we are doing episode 2 of our series on payment card industry, PCI, and point of POS systems, and the payment processing systems. We have our special guest, Keith Sconiers, with us today, and he is from a company called PaySuite. We did his intro last before. Today, this episode is actually going to be talking about decoding fee structures. And this is something that I think is really important to understand for a business owner or somebody who's responsible for sort of the credit card processing relationships. You talked about interchange fees the last time and kind of how these are already fixed, right? Depending on who is in the background of this thing. But can you take a little bit of time to help everybody understand like what they are, why they're set, and how they're calculated, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the intro. It's an honor to be
Yeah.
here. Yeah. So interchange fees are structured by Visa, MasterCard,
Mm-hmm.
American Express, and Discover in partnership with the bank that issues the card that they give to their customers who are using
Mm-hmm.
their financial tools, right?
Okay.
And so when Visa works with a bank, they come up with a interchange fee that's associated with that card, which, as you
Mm-hmm.
can imagine, depending on how many rewards and things of that nature, all go into factoring what the cost is for that
Mm-hmm.
card to be processed. So,
Okay.
depending on who you talk to, providers will say there's anywhere from 3 to 600 cards or interchange fees floating around there on the internet, depending on whether it's a credit card or a debit card. And these fees are managed by Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover in partnership with the bank that they distribute those cards through,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay.
And so you can imagine, especially as a business owner, getting phone calls from everyone telling you that they can save you a ton of money, they can do free processing. There's all of these strategies and tactics that are very dishonest, I would say, that sales reps knowingly or unknowingly use to get in front of a business owner to talk about payment processing. But when you
Mm-hmm.
look at your overall cost of what you pay to accept credit cards, if you're being overcharged by your provider in terms of the markup that they charge on top of
Yeah.
interchange,
Yeah.
another word you could use for interchange is like wholesale, like the cost is the cost when it comes to
Oh.
wholesale, right?
Yep.
It could be 60, 70% of your entire bill. If you're getting a square, efficient pricing from your payment processor, is probably closer to 80 to 90% of your total cost is interchange fees, which are
Wow.
non-negotiable.
They're already baked.
They're already banked. There's
How
nothing
are they
that.
calculated that? Like, is every, like, I'm a credit union,
Hmm.
I'm a bank, you're an online bank, whatever it
Hmm.
is,
Hmm.
whoever's issuing that, how are those calculated? What goes into that?
Yeah, so it's between Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover, and whatever bank that card was issued with,
Mm-hmm.
and some other rules that have to do with debit card legislation. But before we go into that, let's talk a little bit about like how the fee is calculated. So when a card
Yeah.
or a program gets created, they'll decide based on rewards and a variety of other factors. This card is going to be 2.5% plus 10 cents a transaction to process.
Okay.
When that card gets issued at no matter what the bank is, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to get charged 2.5% plus 10 cents a transaction, plus the assessment fees that are going to either Visa, MasterCard, American Express, or Discover. And there's nothing anyone can do anything about that. That's what it costs because it was issued that way. And that's what the interchange fee is for that card. The other
Wow.
the other part that you're going to get charged just overall from having an account with a merchant provider is they're going to have their markup fees, which could be additional authorization fees, additional transaction fees, monthly fees, PCI compliance fees, program fees. It's sunny outside and raining, or it's snowing outside fees. It doesn't, right?
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
fees, every processor is at liberty to create whatever markup fees they want
Hmm.
to add for providing the account.
Okay. So let me make sure I understand this correct. Me as the card holder,
Yes.
already, the minute I get that card, my
Hmm.
bank has already negotiated certain fees
Yes.
that are on the back end.
Hmm.
I don't see them.
Correct.
And then you have the merchant or the processor that
Hmm.
issues the point of sale system and sells a point of
Hmm.
sale system
Hmm.
to the retailer or the
Hmm.
online retailer or whatever.
Hmm.
And they have fees that they put on top of that. So you have sort of both parties where some of the fees are already structured and built out. And as a consumer, you don't really have any control. As the
Right.
retailer, you don't really have any control over those because
Right.
that's already been predefined,
Hmm.
right?
Correct. Correct.
And okay, all right. So that makes sense.
Hmm.
So then last time we kind of talked about some of your options, and I wanted to sort of ping you on this.
Yeah.
Is a flat fee or a percentage based fee better for the business owner? And if one or the other is not better, what are the differences that a business owner can kind of think about when they're evaluating their current and or potential future solution that they're looking
Yeah. I would say the answer is yes.
at? I was afraid of that.
Right. I think it
Yeah.
really depends on the business. It depends on what size the business is. It
Yeah.
depends on how important it is for the CFO, controller, CPA, whoever's looking at these transactions and reconciling them. It
Okay.
depends on what level of acumen they have for managing this area of the business, and if they like the level of transparency that they want. A flat rate doesn't give you much transparency. It
Sure.
could provide some simplicity around, hey, I know I'm paying 2.9 and 30 cents. That
Yeah.
is what it is. It's easy math. You can forecast what it's actually going to cost. And in many cases, it could be great for a business.
Hmm.
Where it becomes problematic is where you start getting fee increases or fee adjustments and not down but up, and you don't have
Yeah.
any understanding of why the fees are actually going up specifically for your account. So for example,
Okay.
so Square, which is a major player in the market, provider in the market that
Hmm.
provides a lot of
Yeah.
merchant accounts and merchant services
Oh yeah.
for companies, typically traditionally they've operated in a master merchant scenario where they are the master merchant account and they have tens of
Yes.
thousands of sub accounts that are flowing up or reporting to that master merchant account. They just initiated a 5 cent transaction fee across the board for every single one of their merchants. Now, if you're selling one or two or three or four or five transactions a month, $10,000 a pop, you're a great business. But if you're a restaurant and you're selling $2 tacos on Taco Tuesday, which is coming up here, 5 cents is a lot of money,
That's true.
right? And
It,
there's no way for you to understand why
yeah,
your account, like, right, there's no customization to it. And
that makes
so
sense. Okay.
flat rate can be a great model depending on the business owner, but it also depends on what size your business is. You're not really going to get hurt by flat rate when you're at a low volume count or transaction
Okay.
count. So
Okay.
it really is case by case. But I always lean towards having the most transparency possible,
Hmm.
which is why maybe in one or two occasions someone has asked us for a flat rate and we'll provide it, but
Yeah.
it's not transparent. And when it's time to do a fee increase, I would prefer a business owner have full access to all the details as to what their true baseline cost is before the payment processor gets paid. And that's
Hmm.
when you know that, that's when you're in the strongest position to negotiate.
Yeah. Okay. So percentage is generally better,
Hmm.
generally speaking, but the
Yeah.
factors would then be number of total transactions, average transaction size, right? Number
Hmm.
two. And then number three would be the other part of it is how critical is it for you to understand how much you're paying to the provider who gave you that point of sale system to
Yeah.
use and or that you bought it from,
Yeah.
because you can't control the interchange. It's already decided, right?
Yeah.
So
Can I
that's
speak to this?
non-negotiable.
Yeah, can I speak to this a little more? Just to give you an example,
Sure.
we work with a company that manufactures like tooth replacements, molars,
Oh,
right? Things of
sure.
that nature. They
Yeah.
called me up 2 weeks ago and said, "Hey, we're thinking about switching. We found this great provider. They told us we could save an additional 1% based on our volume." And when I looked at their account, I was like, you're only paying a markup of 1/4%. So where are they going to get an additional 0.75% in savings for
Yeah.
you? It's not actually possible. But as a company or as a leader who's not well versed in payment processing and interchange fees and who gets
Yeah.
paid and how they get paid, it's
Hmm.
very easy for these providers to just whip up a presentation or a proposal that looks amazing. And it's like, who wouldn't save 30 grand a month if they could? Right?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it can be very meaningful dollars in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But if you
So
don't,
there was
yeah.
only there
Hmm.
was only a quarter of a percentage already that was being charged. So how are you going
Correct.
to get me the extra percentage?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's bananas.
Yeah.
Marketing can be very powerful,
Yeah.
and it can be used in ways, and sometimes by the wrong folks,
Hmm.
to create a vision or a picture that's really not realistic.
Yeah.
Wow. So, why does the billing model matter when it comes to selecting a processor? Because this is something that you and I have talked about privately
Yeah.
before, right? But
Hmm.
why does the billing model matter?
Because you always know in a transparent billing model, which would be interchange plus, cost
Mm-hmm.
plus, this is what major companies use, no matter if
Mm-hmm.
it's Costco or Target or Nordstrom, they are
Mm-hmm.
all using what is called cost plus pricing, interchange plus pricing, because
Okay.
it fully discloses every single line item that you're being billed for. The reason why that's important is because when you have, either tiered pricing where they're putting your transactions in buckets, they can
Mm-hmm.
violate the terms of their agreement technically without violating the terms of your agreement with them.
Wait, how does that work?
Well, because if I quote you as a business owner, if I come to you with my billing model that says I'm going to give you three different buckets that your transactions will fall into, I can change the rules in which how those transactions are placed within the bucket. So if I
Oh,
say, so if I say, hey, I'm going to give you three rates, you're going to have a 1%, 2%, 3%. All I have to do is change the rules around what qualifies as 2% and 3%, and I can double my profit without saying that without changing your actual rates. I just the change the rules on what gets qualified as mid qualified or non qualified by
oh,
your rate,
wow.
right?
That's kind of a underhanded way of going about
Yeah,
some. Huh. But you're under a contract, so it gives
mm-hmm,
them the flexibility to
mm-hmm,
do this other stuff.
yeah,
That makes perfect sense of why that billing model and understanding that billing model
mm-hmm,
would be so important,
yeah,
especially if you're doing lots of volume,
mm-hmm,
lots of transactions, even some that you don't do a lot of volume, but you do
yeah,
large transactions, right? If
yeah,
you're selling your average ticket at the end of the transactions, five, six, $700, that percentage change can add up really quickly. If you all of a
yeah,
sudden qualifying transaction is at 1%, well, now it's at 2%,
yeah,
and it directly impacts your margin on your product or your service, depending
yep,
on what you're delivering. Well, okay,
yep.
so the last question for this particular bite that we're going to go over around fee structures is, how does free payment processing work exactly? You hear
Good
it a
question.
lot, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, there's no way around paying interchange fees. Like,
sure. So nothing's
let's
free.
just get that off the table, right?
So let's clear
So
that up
yeah, so the only way free technically works is if you grant a payment processor the right to charge your customers for payment processing
directly.
directly. Correct. So that's on checkout pages, that's on receipts, additional transaction fees that are showing up on your receipt, like if you're paying at a
Mm-hmm.
restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
things like you will surcharging things like that. And
Okay.
there's nothing wrong with that per se. I think it's just important for you to understand the entire like customer experience and journey in your
Mm-hmm.
business.
Mm-hmm.
And is it worth you having your customers do math or pay additional surcharges when they check out? Because that's like the last thing that's your last interaction with your customer. But payment processors sell this not because it's good for the business. They sell it because instead of having to, provide a markup of a quarter of a percent or a half a percent, which is
Uh-huh.
which is the average fee that we charge when we're working with a customer, they
Mm-hmm.
can make 2-3% markup on every single one of their accounts because all the end users or customers are actually being charged, not the business owner themselves. And so
Mm.
that's how free payment processing works, is that you're just granting the payment processor the right to bill your customers 2%, 3%, in some cases 4% for paying you for their meal or the service that they're acquiring from you.
So that leads me, that's a good point, because that I often see that when I'm making online donations to
Yeah.
my not-for-profit,
Mhm.
organizations that I support in the community.
Mhm. Yeah.
It says, do you want to add
Yeah.
a dollar value to cover the
Mhm.
processing fee for this, right?
Yeah.
And as a
Yeah.
not-for-profit, I'm like, oh yeah, every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are probably other scenarios where, as a consumer, you don't see that
Correct.
on your bill.
Yeah. Right.
It's
Uh-huh.
it's there, but you're not
Uh-huh.
looking. You're just looking, what was the total? Let me put my
Yeah.
tip in. You know what
Yep.
I mean?
Yep.
And I find that tipping is also something that, that from a restaurant, a food service, food industry, the tip is sometimes pre-built in there too.
Mhm.
And it's been really a great experience when the server comes back and said, "Hey, the tip has already been added. I just want you to know.
Yeah. Right.
Look at that." Right. So
Mhm.
that awareness, I guess,
Mhm.
some organizations are very upfront about it, and other
Yeah.
organizations are not. And so
Right.
sometimes you don't even know. Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
nothing is ever free. Somebody is always paying for it, right? So
Yeah. And I got
yeah,
if it's okay, I'd like to share just one more piece about that, especially when it
sure.
comes to nonprofit, because nonprofits get specialized emerging market
Hmm.
rates that they qualify for, but many of
Yeah.
the payment providers, especially the payment facilitators that we've talked about, they
Yeah.
actually don't pass that on to the nonprofit. They've stopped offering lower rates to nonprofits because they can keep the difference between what they're being billed by Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and what they're actually presenting to the nonprofit. So in your checkout experience, you could see yourself paying 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, even 10% to cover the fee. And that's
Hmm.
covering software fees and payment processing fees when the actual
Yeah.
true cost is closer to 1 or 2%. So there's an 8% margin that these technology platforms and payment processors are making, because they know that when you go to the checkout on a nonprofit, you're more likely, maybe 5 times more likely, to cover the fee because it's a nonprofit. It's a cause you care about. So there's really an unlimited, there's no ceiling on how much you can make per
Wow.
customer when you're charging these fees. And I think it's critical for leaders who are making decisions about their payment processor to take the
Yeah.
time to understand what billing models are being presented to them,
Yeah.
what are the economics around it. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't surcharge, but would you rather your business collect that additional 2% in profit that you
Hmm.
can deploy into your systems, your employees, your staff, or would you let the payment processor who has no relationship with your customer collect that additional 2%?
Yeah. And I bet you there are a lot of not-for-profits that don't pay
Yeah,
attention to that. They just know, hey, I have this option where it doesn't cost me.
yeah,
I'm going to pass this on. And they don't
yeah,
know that there's, an inflated percentage on top of what the real fee would have been if they had, built it into the transaction. Interesting. I didn't
yeah.
even think about that, and that they have that ability because they're the processor. They can,
Mm-hmm.
just like on the retail side, they can
Mm-hmm.
change whatever fee they have, what they
Mm-hmm.
negotiate with the retailer as a business. Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
this has been a great knowledge bite to go through with you. We've got a few more of these that we'll get recorded and send out for folks to listen and learn. If you have questions about point of sale systems and payment processing and you'd like some help, feel free, reach out to Keith. You can email him. His email address is keith@gopaysuite.com. If you have questions around just general credit card processing and PCI compliance, you can always reach out to our team here at Convergence. We are gofurther@convergencenetworks.com. Thanks for listening and watching this segment. We'll have a few more for you soon. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.